Tēnā tātou people, hopefully you can all see me. Nice one. Hey, tēnā tātou, and in recognition of Niue Language Week, whakalofa lahi atu, nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the Code of Integrity for Sport and Recreation webinar. So great to have you join us today, and exciting to continue the development of the Integrity Code. This is important work that has evolved over a long period of time that has included the efforts of a number of people, some of which are here today, so thank you. So we are the Sport Integrity Commission, and the key speaker in this webinar is our Chief Executive, Rebecca Rolls. And we've got a team here to support the webinar today, and that is Paul, Regan, Sarah, Sarah, Danny, ko waio, ko Ru Todi, tōku ingoa. My name is Ru Todi. So we're currently midway into a public consultation on the Integrity Code, and this webinar provides us with an opportunity to bring to life the consultation documentation that many of you have seen already. So additionally, we get an opportunity to ask some questions of you. Likewise, you get an opportunity to ask questions of us. A reminder that we are available to talk to you beyond this webinar, and we want to hear from you as part of the consultation. So please submit your feedback, have your say. So without giving too much away, Rebecca will talk to you about the Commission's mahi. We'll talk about the Integrity Code, code adoption and application, minimum standards, and the benefits of those who adopt the Integrity Code. But before we go any further, I do want to start us off with karakia. So me karakia tātou. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei, mauri ora. So there is some keeping, some housekeeping that I need to pass on before we get into the content. So toilets, you know where these are, and you can use these when you need. Feel free to turn on your captions, your live captions, and you'll see 3 dots at the top of your team screen, the ellipses. You can go in there, and in language and speaking, you can click on the live captions option. We're going to run a couple of pop-up questions throughout the webinar, so please look out for these and interact. You can utilize the Q&A chat to fire through your questions regarding the Integrity Code, and we'll do our best to answer these in this session. If you're part of a sport and recreation organisation, please think about how the Integrity Code impacts your community, including your members and your staff. Finally, look out for communications post-webinar, including answers to questions that may not have been answered during this webinar. Before I pass you on to Rebecca, I'd like to play a short clip of our consultation video, and I'm going to see you all at the end of the webinar, and soon you're going to hear from Rebecca. So video, please.
The power to keep sport and recreation safe and fair
is in all of us.
As one team, we can help prevent harm.
As tamariki and rangatahi,
Harm can mean abuse, discrimination, or not playing it straight.
So if you see something that's not tika,
or need support raising integrity standards,
The Commission, Te Kahu Raunui, is here to help.
out here.
in here.
Wherever we play.
Thanks, Ru, for that, and welcome along, everyone. Good to see you. And as Ru said, I'm Rebecca Rolls, Chief Executive at the Sport Integrity Commission. So off the back of that and the consultation video there, I just want to talk a little bit more just about generally about our mahi. And there's a slide there. Thanks, Rach. So we're here to partner with the sector and work here to lift standards. I think that's pretty obvious, and most of you already know that. But the idea is that standards are consistent across the entire sport and recreation community. We all have a part to play in that, and we want to take things off your plate, not put them on it in terms of your organisation, but you also as a participant. So That involves setting and administering standards and rules, like we say there, providing an impartial complaints and dispute resolution service, and also investigating and reporting on integrity failures in sport and recreation across those 3 areas. So anti-doping, many of you will be familiar with already. That has been around. The previous iteration was Drug-Free Sport New Zealand. It's been around for a long time. That continues. So for those of you who are in that space, you shouldn't notice anything different other than different branding, but the same amazing service that you've always had so far. And then the other 2 there, participant protection and competition manipulation. They're the pieces that the code mainly deals with. And those are the bits that we are sort of talking about today and want to keep working hard on lifting capability and capacity across the sector. So you might be sitting there wondering what's in scope for the Commission. What does it mean? What does it cover? Well, on the right there is a threat to integrity, and that's relevant because that is what we respond to. We respond to threats to integrity to make sport and recreation safer and fairer. That's it in a nutshell. Now, not all those threats are relevant to recreation organisations or even community sport, so we want to acknowledge that up front, but they are to most sporting bodies, and match fixing is another one that not everyone has an interest in or needs to consider, but together they form the integrity system, and that is what we are here to work with. Hubs and programs at every level are vulnerable to abuse, discrimination and intimidation, as are participants. And abuse of children, young people and vulnerable adults is a particular concern. And unfortunately, instances of these behaviours are becoming more visible, and that's the reason the Commission was formed. And some of those reviews and previous issues you'll be familiar to some of you. But really, we're also worried about the stories we don't hear. So how many people have simply stopped participating rather than seeking help? And imagine the flow-on effects of that in terms of health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and everything else. So as it says there, we respond to threats and integrity to make sport and recreation safer and fairer. The threats to integrity are defined in our legislation, Integrity Sport and Recreation Act. I encourage you to read it. It's not that long. For legislation, it's actually quite readable, I think. We cover both sport and physical recreation, as I said, so that includes NSOs, national recreation organisations, right through community to high performance. So it is really an all-of-sector approach. So with that in mind, I just want to ask you guys to have a little bit of a think now, because we're going to just ask first of our pop-up questions or our interactive pieces. And it's around the code itself and whether that's a way that will work or will be effective to protect participants. So hopefully that just popped up in your screen. Really simple choices there. You don't need to think about it too much. Really keen on your initial reactions. Excellent. See some of those coming through. Keep them coming through. You should be able to see it in your chat, I think. Excellent. Okay, we'll tuck that away and come back to it later, perhaps. So next question I think you might be asking, and certainly one we get asked quite a lot, is why do we need an integrity code? Well, one of the reasons is because you asked for it. All of our consultation over the last 2 or 3 years through the establishment phase has been resounding in this area, in that people want to know what the standards are. They want a consistent reference point, and they want that to be really obvious and for everyone to understand it. And that means that everyone knows what good looks like and that it's really clear what's required. And we know everyone wants the same outcomes because we've asked them, and I can guarantee you that's exactly what people want. And this is a good way to give direction and create consistent standards across all sports and all organisations. So at its core, the code is here and intended to prevent and address harm in sport and recreation by setting out those standards, keep tamariki, rangatahi and vulnerable people safe. And that vulnerable people phrase is a deliberate one that came out of our consultation largely with disability groups, but just recognises the fact that you can be 18 or over and still be vulnerable. Help improve the integrity capability of sport and recreation organisations. Again, that's something we hear a lot about because everyone is busy and often people just don't have the ability to really deliberately look after this in their budget. Clearly set out what organisations need to do to prevent and address harm, and then explain what our role is when there are serious integrity issues. And as I said, it was developed because the sector asked for clear guidance on what's acceptable and what's unacceptable behaviour and how to respond when those issues occur. There's some things to sort of understand about the code and about how it's adopted. So really important to know, and I think most of you do already looking at the names on our list, that the Integrity Code is voluntary. That's really deliberate and again came out of consultation and policy work because we want to partner with you as organisations and participants to make sport and recreation safer and fairer. We're aiming for collaboration and we know that encouraging proactive adoption will lead to better outcomes for everyone. We really don't want to drag organisations reluctantly towards compliance, and the change we'll see could be minimal, we think, if that happens. And it'll also be more time and resource intensive for the Commission. And obviously we're keen to avoid that. Voluntary proactive adoption is more likely to lead organisations to aiming higher and taking a continuous improvement approach. And we've seen that already. I touched on the anti-doping work before, the sports anti-doping rules, which are also out for consultation. That's the approach that's been taken on that. We all know in the sport and recreation sector, partnership approach is how we roll. There is some provision in the legislation for review in 5 years' time, and that might be the time where, depending on how the first 5 years goes and where the sector's at, that might be a time to consider whether that it's better to be mandatory. But at this point, that voluntary approach is certainly one that has everyone's support. It can be adopted by organisations with participation in the sport and recreation sector as a primary purpose. So that's a key definition piece there. And we're really strongly recommending that adoption starts at that national level. So national sporting organisations and national recreation organisations, and cascades down through structures and constitutions. And then from adoption, you'll see in some slides in a minute that we're proposing organisations will have 12 months to put minimum standards in place. So have a think about that from your perspective as we move through the next couple of slides to think about what's required and how that time frame feels for you guys. So the code, what is it? Well, it's been a lot of things in the last 2.5 years, and at the moment it's at its shortest version, I promise you. And it's still something that we're working on in terms of making sure it's as succinct as possible. But where we've landed is on these 6 minimum standards. And I say minimum with emphasis because it's not minimal standards. These are things that you guys as organisations will often have in place anyway. So they're certainly not unachievable. And in fact, some of them are quite passive, but they're really, really important. And I'm just going to take a little bit of time on each one to step through it. And please, as we go through, if there's something you don't understand, throw questions in the Q&A function that Roo talked about so we can pick them up. The first one might be obvious, but it's to prohibit the behaviours that are a threat to integrity. So the ones that were on that slide earlier, they're in the legislation. Make sure that they are prohibited in your sport. Now, that doesn't mean prevent, because we know prevention's impossible. You can't prevent everything. But if it is against a rule, then you can absolutely, obviously, prohibit something. That is a key part and key minimum standard. Just to be clear about what's okay and what's not. And we'll certainly help you with that in defining it. Number 2 there, every organisation will have a dispute resolution process already. Some work better than others. I know there's a constitution part, there's a part in constitutions about it. That is a minimum standard that organisations have to have. So have to be implementing an effective and fair dispute resolution process in relation to threats to integrity. We'll talk a little bit more about that and how it works with the Commission later on, but by and large that is a really basic standard, and again, something most of you already have. Now, number 3 there is one I want to spend a little bit more time on, and that is around proactively safeguarding children, young people and vulnerable adults. So again, that deliberate call out of those groups, because they are vulnerable, they are at risk, and there are special considerations when you're working with them. And it basically refers to protections for those groups so that we can provide safe activities and environments and require what we call specified persons to have safety checks and be trained in safeguardings. Now, again, this is something that will be familiar to a lot of you, but it's really about a specific definition for those people who need a little bit more training, a little bit more background checks. So please have a look at that definition in the discussion document and in the code and let us know what you think about that. But it's really important because policies and practices in some areas with this group, they require a little bit more thinking, and those are things like one-on-one interactions, taking, sharing or storing images, changing rooms, transport and accommodation. I mean, these are all really, really basic, logical things, but they're also things that can have different meanings depending on what the activity is and what particular sport or recreation activity you're involved in. So what will we do? We'll provide a model safeguarding policy think we already have, which organisations can adopt to achieve the minimum standards. So if you look at that and you supplement in the gaps where you need to, everything about your organisation, we'll deem that to be compliant with the code. Not just because we've written it, but because it covers off the areas that we think, after a lot of research and consultation, are the important ones. And we'll encourage and support organisations to go beyond that minimum standard over time and create the safest sport and recreation environment they can. So number 4 there, just looking at notifying the Commission of issues of serious concern. So the code has what we call a mandatory reporting clause, and that means that when something really serious happens, even if it's not something the Commission deals with, you still have to let us know about it. And there's some really good reasons for that, not just so that we can help in the moment, but also so that we can make sure we are feeding that into our education and into our learning, into our awareness raising. And some of those serious issues, examples would be like abuse of children or vulnerable adults, sexual misconduct, intimidation by organisations, that sort of thing. And as I said, that provides us with really important information for the future and for learning. Standard 5 there, dispute resolution and investigations, is an example of how we need you to cooperate with the Commission. So if you sign the code and we're involved, cooperation is really easy. So it's really important, sorry. And this was one of the ones I was describing as quite passive and quite easy. So assuming if you adopt, then you are going to cooperate with us. Obviously, there'll be some conversations. Our involvement may range from a lot to not very much, but it's important that you cooperate with us. And we certainly don't think that will be difficult or challenging. However, it is really important to call it out. And that's about organisations and participants cooperating to help resolve the issues. We know that resolving things early and appropriately helps minimise harm to everyone involved and get everyone back involved. And then last one there, the Commission will be working with you to provide resources to share with members and staff, policy templates, learning materials and other support and advice, so you can meet that 6th standard there of providing information to your members about the code. So you'll remember I talked about signing at a national level, so it cascades down. So that's what this bit helps you with, is if you're a national organisation or if you're receiving something from your national organisation, the person or the organisation signing up, so the NSO, has a responsibility to make sure that filters down. And we're doing a lot of work in the background around that to make sure that filtering down process, we know that trickle sometimes runs out at halfway. So trying to make sure we're working with other organisations in the regions to ensure that support is there as well. So that's the minimum standards. As I said, well, I want to ask you a couple of things about that shortly, but I also think it's worth just stepping through quickly and simply the adoption process that we're proposing in the discussion document. So you'll see on the screen there, we've sort of broken it down into 3 areas, and the important thing is a conversation to start with. So if you think you're ready to adopt, pick the phone up and talk to us. And we'll go through our processes there, make sure people are able to adopt and they have everything they need, and then we'll sort of agree or formally agree a start date that that organisation can adopt the code from, because that's an important date that I'll get into shortly. But once we're at that point, and bearing in mind that's controlled by the organisation, so there's plenty of time even from now. We've got resources up on the website to get things to a point where you think actually we're ready to adopt. The implementation phase, we're proposing 12 months there. And we want to hear a little bit about that too, and how that feels now that you know what all the minimum standards are. But that feels about right to us. We don't want to make it too long, because if you stretch it out too far, things change and you have to keep reworking things, but also don't want to make it unrealistic. And I sort of come back to the fact that if you're starting the clock, hopefully you and us, we're in a place where we're really confident that's achievable. So at the end of that 12 months, integrity code policies must be implemented within 12 months, as I said, and those 6 minimum standards need to be met. And look, we want to be efficient, but also realistic and make it achievable for everyone. So that's certainly the goal. I need to emphasise that it's within organisations' control when that clock starts ticking. And that's why we're sort of looking at that 12-month time frame. Also want to acknowledge just quickly, and I'll throw to our General Counsel Paul O'Neill shortly to see if there's anything to add, but we're really aware the Incorporated Societies Act changes have been in and around for a while. Some are through the other side, some are looking forward to April 2026 when it's over, but there are some efficiencies available in that process too, and we've been working with Sport New Zealand on making sure, and I know Julie Hood's on this call probably, she's done some excellent work, but making sure that you've got everything you need to be able to amend your constitution, hopefully at the same time, to enable that code to be adopted if the board and the members vote for it. But Paul, anything else that you think you should add to that?
Kia ora koutou, everybody. The only thing I'd add is, in our experience to date with consultation, every sport, there's probably some similarities, but there are some weird and wonderful and unique structures out there about how sports are set up. So there's not a one-size-fits-all constitutional amendment that will necessarily work for every sport, but we're really keen to have conversations with each of you to make the constitutional amendment and the adoption process as easy as possible. We can point you in the direction of some good templates, some good draft constitutional amendments that might work for you. We can also have conversations about how to time it, whether you're ready to adopt, and what that sort of staging process looks like. And even for some organisations, whether you're in a position to adopt or you might be better to align or support or just champion the code, because not every organisation in the sport and recreation sector will need to adopt, or it might not make sense for you to adopt. But the good thing about being in a smallish country like Aotearoa is we can have conversations with individual NSOs and organisations about what's best for you. So please do reach out to us and pick up the phone, and we can talk about your situation, because we certainly don't assume that everyone's set up in the same way.
Cool, thanks, Paul. So we're going to ask another question shortly. I've just had a caller from Grafton just let me know that the chat function's not working, and I just want to remind you guys that the Q&A icon right next to the chat is where you can fire in any comments, questions, anything like that. So don't hold back. If you've got some burning ones, throw them in there. We can come back to them. And I think we're probably just about ready for the second pop-up question. And like I signalled earlier, just interested to know how that time frame feels for you guys. And be honest and throw in anything else in the chat that explains why you have that view. I think it's fair to say, as Paul said, there's a few different. Everyone has a different way in, and that can be it can be longer or shorter suits. Some people get it done in a month, but we, as I said, want to be realistic and efficient there. All right, thanks for that. If you're still thinking, that's all right. You'll still be able to throw your thoughts in. I'll move shortly to complaints, and then we can hopefully bring it all together at the end with another question. So I think this is the area it's fair to say most of you have been talking to us about. So just a bit of a refresher in case someone on the call isn't really aware. So previous to the Commission, Sport New Zealand contracted a mediation, or SRCMS, Sport and Recreation Complaints and Mediation Service, to receive and process and action, investigate, etc. complaints. So the Commission has taken that contract over, and the SRCMS and their people are now with us. So if you have had experience with them, you'll get the same people. The difference now is that obviously our processes and systems need to be aligned to our legislation. So by and large, the same people, but slightly different processes, and hopefully, processes that through legislation make things a little bit more efficient. So just really quickly, we'll always work with people and organisations to achieve fair outcomes to a complaint. And as I said earlier, we want those achieved as early as possible in the process. Often that means the organisation working through your own processes, and often that is just the best place to do it. And we can offer support, guidance and services. And in some cases that could be, for example, a mediation, I should say, or it was an investigation or something like that. And that investigation piece is really important, because whether the code's been signed or not, the Commission can investigate. But when someone is an adoptee of the code, we have different things we can do, which I'll come to shortly. But really important to understand that if the code is breached, you've signed the code and it's breached, that the Commission can investigate. So those 6 things there on the slide are the list of things available to us. So first of all, there, take no action. It might be better placed somewhere else, or it just may not meet a criteria. Refer it back to a relevant organisation to decide whether to take action, and that's obviously could be the NSOs. In some cases, it's best, and this could happen in the take no action scenario as well, it's best referred to, say, police or Human Rights Commission or something like that. Or there might be an opportunity or a need for a joint investigation or joint process. For example, if we refer something to police, there still might be a process sitting in the organisation in the sector that the Commission needs to have a role in. We can refer to dispute resolution services that we provide. We can investigate, as I've touched on. And then from there, we can refer individual participants to the Commission's independent disciplinary panel. Now, that's a code-only process. We can only do that if someone's signed and breached the code. And we can require an organisation to take remedial action. Important distinction there is only individuals can go to this disciplinary panel, and the Commission can require organisations to take remedial action. So there's a slight distinction in there. So looking at all that, maybe you're thinking, so why sign? What are the benefits? And I think this is something that you all need to decide with your boards ultimately. And what we've done here is sort to kind of, I guess, explain some differences and what we think increase the value proposition. And largely it's about accountability. So if all the support and resources available from the Commission, why would you need the integrity code is the question. Because our resources are available anyway. They're available now. They'll be available by and large through the whole life of the Commission, but there are some differences once you've signed the code. So it enables us to do more, and it enables consistency, and that's only achieved when everyone's doing it. So if something happens in your organisation and we're already working together, there's a lot more we can help with. Without the integrity code, we can't use the disciplinary panel, and that's a key tool in our toolkit. And the best we can do is write a report about an organisation and potentially publish it. Working with us and adopting these standards, we think will only improve some things like reputation, the trust your members have in you. And what we also know through some of our research and consultation so far is that parents really take this into account when they select a club or an activity for their kids. So benefits the overall sustainability of the sector. So in summary there, as it says on the slide, and I'll ask Paul if he's got anything to add here as well, but provide more support and resources to increase your capability and to implement the standards. Assist organisations to deal effectively and appropriately with complaints. Independently investigate breaches, and that's a really key part of our policy research as well, is that independence. Sometimes it's just not the best thing for an organisation to conduct an investigation. That independence is really key. And same with the disciplinary panel. I know a lot of your organisations have your own panels, and that they work really good a lot of the time. Sometimes it's better to have an independent one. And lastly, I think the code can assure you, your staff and your members that your organisation is safer and fairer. But Paul, anything for you to add to that?
I suppose the only thing I would add is that we're obviously here today to talk about the integrity code and why we think it's the right thing for organisations to do to adopt it. But the code doesn't exist yet, and no one's adopted it yet for that reason. In advance of that happening, we're here to support organisations. We can provide guidance, support, advice. We want organisations to reach out to us. As I alluded to before, not every organisation will necessarily be in a position to adopt either straight away, or it might not be suitable at all. But that doesn't mean the Commission's not here to help you. So we're here to provide that guidance, support, assistance through our services, through, I suppose, our relationship and partnership managers. So please do feel free to pick up the phone and talk to us about any integrity issues you have, because this is a new space for a lot of organisations. We're a new commission. We're really keen to hear from you, and we don't want organisations to wait till code adoption happens before they're forming a relationship with us and before we're helping you, because ultimately we succeed if capability standards are lifted across the sector. So please do reach out to us in and around code adoption.
Thanks, Paul. And just a couple of things. I've got one more question to ask you guys, but a couple of things to just kind of circle back to, because I know we had a couple of people come in a little later. So the when we talk about the need, and it's one of the minimum standards talks about mandatory reporting, the need for serious concerns. There's absolutely a definition for that, and we'll provide some information around that. Have a look at how that is defined. The same with specified persons, really important from a safeguarding perspective that you guys think those are definitions you can work with, or if we've missed something or you think it needs some other context, then certainly let us know that. And then just the minimum standard 3 that specifically calls out children, young people, and vulnerable adults. The need to call them out specifically, while it may be common sense, is that there are those special considerations from I guess their experiences and things that when, for example, you're one-on-one with a child, or there's accommodation and travel considerations, and in a lot of you sports who operate on tours and that sort of thing will understand that. So we just have to make sure that they're catered for, but B, that they're catered for in a way that is fit for purpose for that sport. And so whether you're snow sports, gymnastics, volleyball, whatever it is, that your policies are, they serve the purpose of protecting your children, young people, and vulnerable adults. So on that note, and given that we've talked for a lot about the code and adopting and everything like that, and the minimum standards, really want to hear from you guys just off the top of your heads now about the minimum standards and whether you think they address the right issues. It's obviously a pretty big question, but keen to get your sort of initial thinking on it. Excellent. Cool. All right. So just a bit more about consultation itself, and hopefully you're all taking the opportunity to throw some bits and pieces in the Q&A. One thing I think just worth clarifying is I come back to the definition of those who can adopt, and that's obviously in a lot of cases national sporting organisations and recreation organisations. There are some organisations that probably fit more into an aligning and advocating role, and we're not suggesting that their members should be captured or included in the code. So like NZOC, Paralympics New Zealand, Recreation Aotearoa sort of fit in that peak body area, who play an important role to support and help. But if you're a member of those organisations, it's not intended that they sign and you are automatically adopting the code. So just the integrity code consultation slide on the right there is a photo of the discussion document. It's probably pretty obvious. It's open now, consultation, and our conversations can kind of carry on past 1 November, and thanks to those who've already reached out, and we've got some conversations locked in. I'm really looking forward to those. And the site itself, the microsite in green there, contains the draft code, discussion document, and information about how to give feedback. And please don't be limited to that. If you need to get creative and lob in a social media post, go for it. Be responsible. If you want to just send us an email or fill out the survey, I would encourage reading through that discussion document and posing some of the questions to yourself, and then perhaps thinking, what are the key things that we want to get across if we push for time. But I guess, it is an opportunity to make a real difference and have your voice heard in whatever your role is. We have consulted widely, but I don't think it can ever be too wide. And we all know that in 2.5 years, people move on and new people come in. So it's important we keep that alive. We want to hear feedback that will really help us get it right. A lot of stuff isn't sitting in the code because it's not the place for it, and it will change probably too often and keep evolving, and needs to stay out of it, and that's more of our procedural stuff, but rest assured we'll be working with you on those as well. All of those who are part of the sector and tasked with implementing it, I think, should be having a say here. We do, and so it's coaches, managers, supporters, everybody. So tell us what works, what might not, what we've missed. And for those of you who've given feedback before and you don't think you see it in there, then let's include that in our conversations, because I can guarantee you we've thought about it. We've got an online survey, as I said, you can meet, and then even once that all finishes, engagement with the sector will continue. We're here now since 1 July. We don't just want to kind of turn up in the street and drive off again. I'm not allowed to compare us to an ice cream truck, my team said. But no, we're moving into the neighbourhood and really want to work with you and be good neighbours. So give that some thought as well. You can sign up to our mailing list, keep up to date with the process, and any questions, like I said, get on the site or email us at Have Your Say. So I think that takes us, and you're probably sick of me talking, to some question and answer opportunities. I think Sarah Kearney from our team is just lit up in your face, and she's going to probably let us know if we've got any questions sitting there.
We do. Kia ora, everyone. Thanks for sending questions through. We've got a few really good ones. So starting off, Rebecca, a question from Jenna relating to the minimum standard 4. Will there be a matrix or guide given as to which incidents are included and what's considered serious concern?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said before, that definition is really key to have a look at. And while I gave some examples around the serious nature of things, that's certainly something the drafting group I know went back and forth on a lot, because we're really mindful, as much as we'd love to know everything, that's really burdensome for organisations to have to report every single thing. So we want to make sure we've got that moving line test right. So yes, we'll provide some information around that. Anything to add, Paul, for you?
I just turn my camera on. Yeah, if you look in the discussion document itself, there's a question around effectively under question 18 in the discussion document, if you want to tab that, as to whether or not we've got that definition right. As Rebecca says, we've made an attempt to capture what we think is serious concern, but take a look at that in the discussion document. Either flick us an email or answer the survey question about whether we've got that definition right, because that's where the feedback's really valuable, because it's that balance between keeping people safe but putting in place something that's practical as well and actually achievable. So yeah, have a look at the discussion document on the microsite and tell us if we've got it right.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Next one's from Judy. She says, I believe the code's a good tool for protecting participants. If the code's intended to protect all participants, why do we need to describe some adults as vulnerable and call that out specifically?
Yeah, great question, Judy. And hello, good to see you. I don't know if you were on, I might have said it right at the start, but we had some good sessions in consultation, particularly with the disability community, who want vulnerable adults to be recognised in purely because from a disability perspective, for example, and particularly around neurodiversity, but any disability, adults can be vulnerable when they're over 18. So that's the reason for that. And it is genuinely, the code is genuinely there for all participants. But again, that vulnerable adults can sometimes fall into that category of just needing a couple more considerations to support them. But I guess, and what I'd say, Judy, is if we think there's a better language for that or something else, I guess any changes you think, or if it's not clear, then certainly let us know about that.
Thanks for that. Next question's from Andrea. What's the position if a membership organisation like NZOC, New Zealand Olympic Committee, or NPC sign up? Are other NSOs bound?
Yeah, so no, like I said before, they're a peak body, so we don't intend to, and you have to be a member of NZOC, so if you want to compete at the Olympics, probably. So no, they're a peak body. They will be someone we'll work with to make sure that they're aligned and they're advocating if and that they obviously have a really important role with anti-doping as well. So we need to make sure that they've got all the information they need around that. But it's definitely intended for national organisations who have those regional and club members.
Next one from Nathan. If an NSO adopts the code first as recommended, what happens if an organisation underneath hasn't adopted it? Would it then be in breach? Or would the NSO be in breach?
Good one, Nathan. Really good question. No is the answer, I think. No, it is. So the NSO adopts, and all of their members, like the regional organisations, are automatically included. You don't need to then adopt it yourself. And then it cascades sort of down from there, depending on the relevant constitutions. But Paul, jump in if you think there's something else that will be helpful for Nathan there.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there is my earlier comment about no two organisations being the same holds true.
Yeah.
And you'll need to work with us, and we're happy to have the conversation about how adoption at that NSO level can cascade down so it captures all of your membership. Because we don't want to be in a position where an NSO is adopted, but there are gaps within that sport. So we'll work with you to make sure that that isn't the case. And similarly, that's why we don't want someone underneath an NSO to adopt it, a club somewhere, because they'd be part of the integrity code, but there'd be gaps throughout the rest of the sport. So we want to work at the NSO level to make sure it cascades down properly and there are no gaps. And that will probably require an individual conversation with each sport to say, what works best for you. But as part of that conversation, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
Some excellent questions today. It's really good. Any more
We've
there,
only got time
Sarah?
for a couple. Yeah. We've got one here regarding not adopting. So what happens if an organisation doesn't adopt at all, and what's the Commission's role or relationship with the organisation in that event?
Look, and with a voluntary code, that's absolutely possible. So what that relationship is really up to the organisation. The Commission is always there to support either way, and I sort of talked through the differences earlier. But it doesn't mean the Commission can't step in if something's serious enough. It can still investigate. Like I said, the only difference is we wouldn't be able to use the disciplinary panel. The most we could do is investigate and come up with a report and some recommendations. But to put a positive spin on it, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't be there to support from a resources and education perspective.
Right. Got another couple coming through. One from Graham, thinking about minimum standard 3. Proactive safeguarding measures. Would this include measures to safeguard student coaches and officials in schools who unfortunately may receive serious abuse?
Great question. It's actually a conversation we had this morning. Rach, would you mind just flicking back to the minimum standards slide so that everyone can sort of see what I'm talking about? We actually had a really good conversation about the sort of the coach education piece and some of the resources you might deliver to coaches needing to be at the level that a younger coach might understand. And I know, Andrew, in gymnastics, that generational gap's really compressed. So you've got, coaches and judges who are really young. So that's on us to work and make sure that our delivery is on point, and make sure that those people are equipped. If the NSO is happy with them and confident that they're in a coaching position and that's the best option, and often it will be, then what we want to do is get alongside and support that as best we can, and realise that sometimes some of that safeguarding information can be confronting, so you need to kind of pitch it in a way that someone feels comfortable.
Awesome. Couple more, and we're still just inside time. One from Lauren. Does the RSO have 12 months from the date the NSO adopts? As constitution updates are in progress and rely on the NSO first, this might not give enough time for the RSO to be compliant.
That's a good question. So if I just play that out in a bit of a scenario, so a national sport adopts, their regional body, let's say if it's cricket, CD cricket, are automatically included in the code. The onus is on the NSO to provide information to that regional organisation to be able to be compliant, and that's the beauty of the 12-month period, I guess. And I guess if we play that out in time and something comes up, one thing the Commission would need to take into account, of course, is what kind of education have they received, and how has that played out, and what else might be received. So hopefully people realise that it's not simply a punitive process, and if a breach occurs, the Commission has some discretion to sort of go, okay, what actually needs to happen here for everyone to get in line? And often that's not going to be some kind of penalty or something like that.
Okay, I think this is our last one. From Sarah. If an NSO adopts this integrity code, does it supersede any existing policies or integrity codes that they have?
So another good question. I think a couple of scenarios that might fit in there is if you've got international federation codes, and what I'd say there is often those codes are already compliant enough for this code, and it could be just simply a case of saying, well, we have to align to that, and that's our policy, and that means that we're compliant with the code. So that's a conversation we can have. But Paul, is there anything else you think you would throw in there?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say there, it's not so much that the integrity code would replace your policies necessarily. You need to be compliant with the minimum standards in the integrity code through your policies. They might already exceed them, or they might just need some tweaking or some adjustment or some additional amendment to get there. So you will amend, replace, supplement your policies in order to get up to the integrity code. So it's not a case of the code comes along and changes everything you've got. It's you look at what you've got and say, am I compliant, and what tweaks do I need to make or additions do I need to make to get there? So it shouldn't be a case of replacement. It's a case of improvement, or as I say, maybe you're already there and you already exceeded it, in which case, brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, everyone. I think we'll call it there, just mindful of getting people back to work. But please, if anything else comes to mind, or you're sort of sitting there jotting notes and you want to pick up the phone later, do, or get hold of us. We'll be around. But I think it's my cue now to be quiet and throw back to you, Ru.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Paul. Hei, tēnā tātou, a whakaue, nuaian for thank you. So whakaue, Rebecca and the rest of the presenters, whakaue for those in attendance today, and whakaue for your questions, great questions. A reminder that the consultation is open for a few more weeks, so please have your say in the meantime. If you have any questions, reach out. So it's time for me to close this webinar and to send you off for the rest of the day. He karakia whakamutunga. Kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turaki whakataha ai, kia turaki whakataha ai, haumi e, hui e, tā iki e, ka ki te koutou mā.
Thanks, everyone.